Let's go now to Malta again from a presentation from Ritienne Gauci. I'm sorry if I don't pronounce your name correctly. Ritienne is coming from University of Malta, and she will present the connecting role of island geomorphology research, perspectives and experiences from Maltese Islands. Ritienne, the floor is yours. We can see your presentation.
Thank you very much, Nikki. Thank you. It's a joy to be here with you all, and especially Happy Women's Day to you all as well. So the purpose of this short talk is to give you some snapshots, some perspectives of what kind of geomorphology research we have been conducting at the Department of Geography of the University of Malta. Even though it's a small department within a small island, we do work which is carried out in a very strong spirit of interconnectedness between different disciplines, and also in collaborations with colleagues from various European institutions. So clearly in 20 minutes, it will not be possible to present all that we do in terms of geomorphology, but I do hope that at least I will be able to provide you with a few highlights from my recent work. So a bit about our department. The department has one of the longest records of geomorphology research at the University of Malta. It's also very active in encouraging graduates to take up this field, especially female graduates. Most of our graduates do proceed to take up successful careers locally and abroad, and also to proceed to masters and PhDs. As I said, we collaborate with an ever-growing number of foreign institutions, and we have been serving on the AIG National Scientific Members for the past 14 years. We also support student organizations. We really try as much as possible to be present with students. This is a photo of a very rewarding experience we had when we hosted the European Geography Association for Young Geographers. And it was rewarding, not just because we were among students, but because we were amongst also a large percentage of female geographers compared to males. So that's very good as well. So we also, as I said, have, in terms of geomorphological landscapes, it has all, of the Maltese Islands, it has attracted the research interest of many international scholars. And here is a snapshot of past and present institutions that enjoy collaborations with us. This is just for what we do in geomorphology. I have to say that an equal number also exists for other disciplines in human geography, such as for transport geography, as for sustainability, for climate change, and historical geography. So that is to show you the level of connectedness that we try as much as possible to encourage in our work. Allow me to wear the hat for a moment of a representative of the CU Alliance. I was very happy to follow the presentation from one of our CU partners, Dr. Molina. So the University of Malta is also part of a consortium with another 5 coastal universities to strengthen strategies and opportunities in research and teaching about the marine and the maritime sector at the European level, and we're very happy that this project is providing more opportunities for research, even in geomorphology. As I was saying, in our geomorphology work, we try to keep an open door policy, not just with our collaborators, but also across with other disciplines. So it is for this reason that over the years, our work in geomorphology has developed in a quite diverse and rich spectrum of topics and bridges in a very multidisciplinary way. In living on an archipelago of islands, a lot of our work inevitably focuses on the coast, with 97% of our coast being made up of limestone rocky coasts. It is on the coast that one finds not only the most spectacular geomorphological landscapes of the Maltese Islands, but also the highest land use development, the highest forms of pressure, and the highest forms of conflicts. And therefore, it is for this reason that we find it extremely relevant to also research in this environment in order to be able to address other issues related to heritage and related to societal hazards. For this presentation, I would like to take one landscape, which is the shore platforms, and to try and show you what research has been done and in what connecting way we've been doing research about landforms. So shore platform studies have been an established field in geomorphology for almost 2 centuries now. And yet studies on shore platforms in the Mediterranean are relatively still not substantial, and even less so on the Maltese Islands. The Mediterranean context is a very important context to add to this body of literature, given that current literature, especially for microtidal platforms, originate mostly from regions like New Zealand, South Australia, Japan, Korea. And these all, as you might imagine, have different climate settings, different wave settings, and also different regime when it comes to Holocene sea level change. The strategic location of the Maltese Islands in the center of the Mediterranean and in being tectonically stable and also having a microtidal setting, these factors all played an important role in using shore platforms as important access points, especially those platforms found in sheltering creeks or bays. So as you can imagine, with a human occupancy of more than 7,000 years on the Maltese Islands, these platforms contributed in no small way to the maritime use and coastal development of the islands. So there are various important connections between the historical development of coastal land use on the Maltese Islands and the presence of these shore platforms skirting the shores. So whilst for many years they were just considered flat rocky outcrops with no particular utility, in effect their strategic presence at the land-sea interface, especially in sheltered bays, provided efficiency for access to maritime and recreational purposes. So this is showing you to what extent our shore platforms have been used and for what purpose over the years. So the accessible nature from both land and sea and its sub-horizontal morphology has attracted various forms of recreation and sports activities all year round, and it continues to do so to this very day. Just this morning, I was reading an article where a consultant in the tourism authority is also looking at potential ways how to create blue flag recognitions for rocky coasts, which was an interesting perspective. But also we see that in addition to intense coastal infrastructure that has been built close on these platforms, we also see military operations, recreation, and even considerations for property revenue. The spatial distribution of shore platforms across the Maltese Islands is strongly driven by the geological structure of the islands, which are tilted at 4 degrees to the northeast and have therefore a low sloping morphology towards most of its eastern coast. So you will notice how most of these platforms skirt the northeastern parts of the coastline. The other reason, however, is that related to the presence of a particular limestone unit, which is the Globigerina limestone. So it's a typical type of limestone unit, which is mostly found on this side of the island. So essentially, we have an oligomyocene type of stratigraphy made by marine sedimentary geology. And this stratigraphy is a very simple, so to speak, way how to understand the geology of the Maltese Islands. In actual fact, when you start to look a bit more in detail at the properties of these layers, you start to understand that it is not as simple as straightforward in terms of its behavior and responses to geomorphological processes. And in fact, through the studies of shore platform, this became extremely evident. So as I was saying, most of these land and shore platforms are mostly developing on the Globigerina limestone member units, specifically the upper Globigerina and the lower Globigerina. So these two units within the Globigerina limestone system create the right geological conditions to develop platforms due to the variable response to erosion resistance along these units. So this is a simplified understanding of the geology of the Maltese Islands and how we are looking at very much the exposure of the Globigerina system, which in this map, it's all shown as being one unit. But in reality, this unit, this Globigerina limestone, has large variabilities in that in relation to resistance or sensitivity to geomorphological processes. So the physical characteristics of the Maltese shore platforms align very well with the shore platform morphology of being horizontal or a sub-horizontal rock surface produced along the shore by the action of marine processes, by wave erosion, by geochemical dissolution, and by other weathering processes. And here we have two examples of shore platforms that can develop, one in the lower Globigerina units and another one in the upper Globigerina units. They're both backed by retreating soft cliffs in the upper intertidal and supratidal zone. And at the foreshore, most of these platforms also end with an abrupt low seaward terminus and are deeply carved abrasional notches even at the mean sea level. So their genesis is generally attributed to differential erosion produced by wave action at the contact zone between these different limestone methodologies. So the variance to resistance by the three subdivisions of the Globigerina limestone leads to the stripping of the least resistant layers and leave a harder surface developed as a shore platform. So most of the platforms in the lower Globigerina limestone member, this is an example, are cliffed back by the middle Globigerina, which presents then a very stepped profile where there are outcrops of hard grounds or conglomerate phosphorus bed between the middle and the lower Globigerina. So essentially there is an important role, not just in the variation between the different limestone units in the Globigerina system, but also driven by these fine layers of hard ground conglomerates that tend to increase the resistance of these platforms to erosion. On the other hand, what we see here on the right-hand side, we see that there is a platform development for the upper Globigerina. And it's a bit more complex a situation here because the upper Globigerina is actually divided into 4 different members. So in the previous slide, you saw Globigerina all mapped out as one unit. And in the previous one to that, we saw them mapped out as 3 units. But in reality, even by just looking at the upper Globigerina, you start to understand how variable and varied it is, the geological morphology of this unit. So essentially, it's subdivided into 4 members. You have a C2, a conglomerate bed, a phosphorus bed at the base, and then a yellow to orange hard compact limestone, which forms eventually the sub-horizontal platform. On top of that, you have a band of yellow to orange, a band of gray marlin middle member, which is also considered as upper Globigerina, but it's a very gray marlin member that behaves in a similar way to the middle Globigerina. And then on top of that, you would have the yellow upper band, another upper band of limestone that is compact enough and provides a steeper profile. So in this situation, especially when the conglomerate bed is and the overlying the lower unit of the Globigerina is located, they offer relatively more resistance to erosion by marine action than the gray marlin middle beds, and as a result, this platform morphology occurs. So essentially, most of the shore platforms of the Maltese Islands, even though they belong to different units in the Globigerina, they tend to have different landscapes. A study which has been developing over the years is to try and understand the geomorphological responses to shore platform erosion. And this study took 5 platforms across Malta, and we set up a network of micro-erosion meter stations in order to monitor and measure rates of surface change, erosion, and also behavior of surface change. We also then did temporal and spatial analysis of that. And we also then did intact rock strength analysis with the Schmidt hammer, and also did some mineralogy tests. These are some preliminary results, which I would like to share with you, just a few slides. The data is quite extensive, and I don't want to burden you with too much statistics and results, so just a few slides. But it clearly shows that that most of the mean values, the intact rock strength values, fall mostly in the category between 35 and 45 values in the Schmidt hammer. But what is interesting is that the two platforms that are in the upper Globigerina, one in Selmun and one in Marsoslok, actually have a different level of intact rock strength. The one in the lower Globigerina are slightly more variable, but they are in comparison a bit more similar than the upper Globigerina. Clearly, the difference lies in the fact that at this particular platform, there was a phosphatic hard ground bed that has made all the difference in terms of its surface strength. So when you look at a cluster analysis, a simple cluster analysis, you start to see the close similarities between the lower Globigerina platforms, but then very distinct properties when it comes to the one of Selmun and the one of the Limara. This eventually corresponds to in terms of annual average rates. In this case, the one of Selmun, the Melliha, had the highest percentage of surface losses, precisely because it's the one that was considered to be softer and doesn't have any form of geological property that can withstand, similarly to the one in the Limara, where you have the hard ground bed. So even though they belong to the same unit, you can see that they eventually ended up on either side of the spectrum when it comes to surface losses. So the short platforms in lower Globigerina presented rates of surface change that were extremely variable, and yet they had variable on an annual basis, semi-annual basis, but also in the individual periods. Another study that we have done over the years is also to study a bit about the traditional artisan knowledge that's used in our short platform when it comes to short platform to salinas management. So we see here, as many of you might know, the short platforms across many parts of the Maltese Islands are actually very soft rock to manage, but at the same time resistant enough to carve out structures from it. So the Mediterranean region has been a favorable area for salt-making activities for many centuries, and the Maltese Islands are not an exception to that. What we tried to do in the geography department was to try and add value to these activities, to these artisanal activities, by doing some ethnographic work on these platforms, and try as much as possible to see also in what way the qualities of this work are actually linked to geomorphological features on platforms. So while we did ethnographic work with salters and salt workers, we also tried to map their work in the space that they are provided on the platform. And this is one example that we eventually managed to do. This is a Schweini platform in Gozo. So this is the first example of an ethnographic work which we did with the Cini family. You have to understand that this is work that is it is passed on from one generation to another, working on these salinas. Some have been working on these salinas for families over 200 years. So you see here how a geomorphological landscape is passing through families and being used and valorized by their work. So the mapping is showing a systematic division of the platform in which there are specific functionalities of these features of these pans. So the idea is to have reservoirs where they fill up with seawater. That seawater eventually goes to warming pans, and from the warming pans, then eventually they go what are known as collection pans. So on the actual evaporation basins. So they actually use the space of the foreshore to the middle shore and the backshore of the platform in order to navigate within the functionality of how salt harvesting is done. So there are also water channels that divert water by a gravity system from one reservoir to another. And eventually there is also at the back collection pans where they eventually use this space to collect the salt and put it at the back of the platform, ready to eventually be taken to store. So it's a very unique and organic way how they've used this platform morphology to eventually create this fascinating geocultural work. This is a second example, which was illustrating the Dellimara platform on the south of Malta. As you can see from the mapping, it shares common artisanal functions of how they produce salt, but you will also notice that there are also differences in the way the work is done. And it's also because it's highly dependent on the geomorphological elements present on the platform. So it's dependent on the exposure of the salinas to prevailing winds, to the humidity conditions brought by those same winds, the elevation of the platform surface area, and how it can accommodate between the different evaporation ponds, reservoirs, collection pans, and also the gradient, how it influences the gravity flow of the brine water through the platform. So,
I'm sorry, there is only 1 minute left.
Thank you very much. So as you can see, this is an example of how we try to connect with heritage sites. The last example is related to using black boulders on platforms to map out extreme wave events phenomena. And we have been doing it by looking at various types of characterization of the platforms from their morphology, and understand by correlating these conditions to hydrodynamic equations to try and understand to what extent they are storm wave induced or tsunamigenic events. And we have also done in other studies radiocarbon dating to try and trace these boulders to past historical tsunamis events. So if you're interested to learn more about the landscapes of the Maltese Islands, there is a recent volume by Springer, published by Springer, and I look forward to keep in touch with you should you require it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. It's really very interesting. It was a really very interesting presentation, combining many different issues taking place in this wonderful environment. We have a question from Egypt, from Amr Salem. The shore platform looks emerged above the current sea level. Did you date it?
There is research that has been done in order to try and identify paleo landscapes and paleo platforms. In fact, incidentally, the image that you see here, which is in the northeast part of Malta, actually extends to a paleo landscape platform. That has been identified through multi-beam surveying done by Maria Cristina Pampolini, which I believe is here with us today. So yes, some of these platforms, not all of them, but some of these platforms are extensions to paleo platforms that have been traced and mapped recently.
Wonderful.